60 aging Spartan veterans faced 3,000 Athenian hoplites on a forgotten battlefield in 369 BC. Most of these Spartans were over 50 years old, ancient by warrior standards. Their joints ached, their reflexes had slowed. Some could barely grip their 8-foot spears without their hands trembling. By sunset, over 800 Athenians would lie dead in the dirt, and Sparta's most impossible military myth would be reborn. Here's what I'm going to reveal. First, how these 60 geriatric warriors weaponized the one advantage age gives you absolute psychological dominance forged through 50 years of killing. Second, the tactical innovation they deployed, that modern special forces still study today. Third, why this stunning victory actually accelerated Sparta's final collapse. But how could 60 exhausted men survive the initial charge of 3,000 fresh warriors? Why did Athens commit its best troops to what should have been a trivial skirmish? What made these particular Spartans so terrifying that their mere presence caused mass psychological breakdown? How does terrain become a weapon when you're outnumbered 50-1? And what cruel irony meant that winning this battle sealed Sparta's doom? This is the story of the Battle of Lechaeon's Revenge, a nameless skirmish history barely remembers, and how 60 broken-down Spartan survivors achieved the most lopsided casualty ratio of the Greek civil wars. To understand how they turned Athens' numerical advantage into a death trap, we need to step back to the moment when Sparta's invincible reputation shattered for the first time in 8 centuries. To understand how 60 old men slaughtered hundreds in a single afternoon, let me take you to the Greece of 369 BC, a world where the impossible had just become reality. For 800 years, Sparta had never lost a pitched battle on Greek soil. Never. The very word Spartan made armies reconsider their life choices. But 2 years earlier, at the Battle of Leuctra in 371 BC, a Theban general named Epaminondas had done the unthinkable. Using revolutionary oblique tactics, he shattered the myth. 700 Spartans died in a single afternoon, including their king. The psychological shockwave rippled across Greece. Sparta, the invincible, had bled. Now every city-state that had lived under Spartan dominance for generations smelled blood in the water. Athens, Sparta's ancient rival, seized the moment. They formed the Second Athenian League, pulling together city-states eager to finish what Thebes had started. Sparta's centuries-old hegemony was crumbling. Border territories revolted. Helo slaves, who'd been crushed under Spartan boots for generations, began uprising. The Spartan homeland itself faced invasion for the first time since the Persian Wars. This wasn't just political realignment, this was potential extinction for the Spartan way of life. Our hero was named Antalcidas, though by 369 BC, calling him a hero seemed generous. He was 56 years old in a world where 50 was genuinely ancient. He'd lost 2 fingers on his left hand to an Athenian sword decades earlier. A Persian arrow had left him with a permanent limp that worsened in cold weather. Chronic dysentery, contracted during a campaign in Asia Minor 15 years prior, had withered his frame until his bronze breastplate hung loose on shoulders that had once been legendary. He commanded what remained of Sparta's 5th Territorial Regiment, 60 men who averaged 52 years old. They called him Antalcidas the Survivor. Not with affection, but with the grim acknowledgement that he'd outlived 5 generations of younger, stronger warriors. For Antalcidas, this wasn't about glory anymore. His eldest son had died at Leuctra. His farm near Sparta had been burned by Theban raiders 6 months earlier. This was about proving that Spartan training, 50 years of relentless, brutal conditioning, could still matter when the muscles failed. The Athenian commander was Timotheus, 42 years old, and considered one of Athens' most accomplished generals. He'd won significant naval victories against Sparta, captured multiple strategic islands, and successfully defended Athenian colonies across the Aegean. His fleet had broken Spartan naval power in the northern territories. More importantly, Timotheus understood combined arms warfare, coordinating infantry, cavalry, and missile troops in ways most Greek generals couldn't imagine. He wasn't cruel or incompetent. He was dangerously competent. Timotheus had studied Theban tactics at Leuctra obsessively, understanding that the old rules of hoplite warfare were being rewritten. His reputation among Athens' warrior class was sterling, a thinking general who won through preparation and intelligence rather than mere courage. He saw this campaign near Corinth as an opportunity to cement Athenian dominance in the Peloponnese and personally humiliate Sparta's fading veterans. The power dynamic was mathematically obscene. Timotheus commanded 3,000 hoplites, fully armored infantry in their physical prime, ages 25 to 35. They were supported by 500 peltasts, light skirmishers with javelins, 200 cavalry, and an additional 300 archers. Total force, 4,000 Athenians. Antalcidas had 60 men. Not 60,000. 60. The economic disparity was equally stark. Athens, enriched by its maritime empire and silver mines, could afford the best equipment. Each Athenian hoplite wore a full panoply worth more than a farmer's annual income. Meanwhile, Sparta's economy was collapsing. These 60 Spartans wore armor their grandfathers had worn, bearing dents from battles fought before some Athenians were born. It wasn't a question of if Antalcidas' unit would be annihilated, but when and whether Athens would bother taking prisoners. The catalyst was territorial. Corinth, sitting on the critical isthmus connecting northern and southern Greece, had fractured into pro-Spartan and pro-Athenian factions. Athens needed to secure the countryside around Lechaeon, the port that controlled access to the Corinthian Gulf, to solidify their strategic position. Here's what the chronicles don't tell you. Timotheus's orders weren't to fight veteran Spartans. Intelligence suggested the garrison was mostly local militia. Nobody told him Antalcidas' 60 survivors had been quietly moved into defensive positions 3 days earlier. As Timotheus's 4,000-strong army moved through the broken terrain northwest of Lechaeon, routing local resistors and burning pro-Spartan farms, the stage was set for an encounter that defied every principle of Greek warfare. Athens' army moving toward the Lechaeon territory was genuinely terrifying to witness. 3,000 hoplites in formation created a bronze wall stretching nearly half a mile across. If they marched in standard 8-deep phalanx formation, they'd occupy a frontage of 1,200 feet. The weight alone staggered the mind. Each hoplite carried approximately 70 pounds of equipment, including a bronze breastplate, cuirass, bronze greaves, an 8-foot ash spear, a 3-foot sword, and the iconic hoplon shield, 3 feet in diameter, 15 pounds of wood and bronze that could stop most projectiles. Their daily food and water consumption equaled that of a significant town. The logistics train alone required 200 pack animals and 50 wagons. At the army's core marched Timotheus's elite unit, 300 Athenian epilectoi, the chosen ones, warriors selected for strength, experience, and proven courage. These men had trained together for years, drilling in the Athenian gymnasiums until their movements synchronized like a single organism. They wore the finest Chalcidian helmets with cheek guards that allowed better hearing and vision than older Corinthian styles, and carried swords forged by Athens' master craftsmen in the Kerameikos district. Each epilectoi represented an investment equivalent to 3 years of a skilled laborer's wages. They'd fought in the Aegean campaigns, the Peloponnesian conflicts, the northern border wars. Their reputation declared, "When the epilectoi advance, cities surrender." The 500 peltasts provided devastating ranged harassment. Armed with javelins effective to 60 yards, they could pepper enemy formations while staying beyond spear range. They wore minimal armor leather caps, small shields prioritizing mobility over protection. These weren't aristocratic warriors. They were professionals who'd mastered the art of the skirmish warfare that was gradually replacing the traditional hoplite clash. The 200 cavalry and 300 archers completed a combined arms force that represented the cutting edge of 4th century Greek military doctrine. This wasn't an army, it was a statement of Athenian power. Antalcidas had 60 men, and calling them a force required generosity. These weren't young warriors in their prime. The Agode system had produced no significant new Spartan citizen warriors for a generation, as declining birth rates and Leuctra's casualties devastated the warrior class. These were survivors in their 50s, men who remembered when Sparta was feared rather than pitied. But here's what made them special. Every single one had completed the full Spartan Agode training system, 13 years of systematic brutalization, starting at age 7, that created warriors who literally didn't process fear like normal humans. Combined, they represented over 3,000 years of combat experience. 22 had fought at Corinthian, 15 had campaigned in Asia Minor under Agesilaus. 8 were Leuctra survivors who'd seen the invincible mystique die but hadn't died with it. Yet their bodies betrayed them. Antalcidas needed help. Mounting his horse each morning, attendants had to physically lift his stiffening left leg over the saddle. Xenagorus, his second in command at 54, had chronic respiratory problems from decades of dust and smoke inhalation. He coughed blood after hard exertion. Morale was complex. They weren't inspired by glory. They'd seen too much death for that romanticism. They were bound by something darker, the knowledge that if they failed here, Sparta itself might not survive the decade. Their key advantage wasn't strength or speed. It was that they'd been killing men since before most Athenians were born, and they understood violence with the clarity of lifelong practice. The battlefield terrain northwest of Leuctra was broken, not flat, plain ideal for phalanx warfare, but irregular ground carved by centuries of rainfall into ravines, ridges, and rocky outcroppings. The main cart track connecting Corinth to Leucaon's port ran through a natural bottleneck where two ridgelines converged, creating a passage only 300 feet wide. This mattered enormously. In open terrain, 3,000 hoplites could deploy their full frontage, surrounding and crushing 60 men through sheer mass. But in a narrow defile, only the front ranks mattered, and suddenly the numbers advantage compressed dramatically. Timotheus couldn't bypass this route without adding 2 days to his march, and his intelligence insisted the opposition was negligible militia. He had 4,000 warriors. What could possibly threaten them? Athens' preliminary campaign had been brutally effective. In the preceding week, Timotheus's army had reduced 18 pro-Spartan villages to ash, killed approximately 200 local defenders, and displaced thousands of civilians who fled towards Sparta, carrying horror stories. The psychological message was clear. Spartan protection meant nothing anymore. The economic damage exceeded 50 talents of property destruction, farms, olive groves, workshops systematically obliterated. Timotheus's strategy was terror-based pacification. Make supporting Sparta so costly that cities would beg for Athenian terms. What Antalcidas did next defied every rule of Greek warfare. Standard Spartan doctrine against superior numbers was defensive positioning, find elevated ground, form phalanx, make the enemy come to you. Antalcidas did the opposite. He positioned his 60 men in 3 groups along the bottleneck passage in an ambush formation that required his outnumbered force to attack first, abandoning their defensive advantages. When his officers questioned this apparent suicide order, Xenophon records that Antalcidas simply said, "Athenians expect us to be afraid. We'll show them what 50 years of killing teaches." But Timotheus had made a critical miscalculation. He assumed Spartans would fight like Spartans, always had honorable, straightforward phalanx warfare in open terrain. He didn't realize that Antalcidas had spent 15 years watching Spartan honor lead to Spartan deaths. And he'd decided honor could go to hell. Timotheus's army entered the bottleneck region on a bright morning in late spring, 369 BC. The advanced scouts, 30 peltasts ranging ahead of the main force, found the terrain seemingly empty. They reported no significant opposition. Standard procedure suggested pushing through the narrow passage quickly, then deploying in open ground beyond. Timotheus, confident but cautious, ordered a measured advance. Epilectoi in front, main hoplite force behind, cavalry and light troops covering flanks where the broken terrain permitted. His army strung out along the route in a column formation, sacrificing the phalanx's defensive solidarity for speed of movement. They expected to march through in 2 hours and make camp near the coast by evening. The Athenian vanguard, 200 epilectoi and 50 peltasts, penetrated 3/4 through the bottleneck before the world exploded. Day 1. First blood. Antalcidas' first group, 20 men led by Xenogarus, erupted from concealed positions among the rocks on the ridgeline's north side. But they didn't attack the strong vanguard. They hit the column's vulnerable center where the baggage train, camp followers, and rear support elements bunched together. The tactical genius was this. By striking the center, Antalcidas cut Timotheus's army into disconnected segments. The 200 vanguard troops were now isolated ahead. The main body of 2,800 hoplites was trapped behind, unable to deploy into combat formation in the narrow terrain. The initial strike killed 38 Athenians in 90 seconds, not through fair combat, but through systematic butchery of surprised, partially armored support troops. Antalcidas' men used terrain ruthlessly, attacking downhill from positions that gave them gravitational advantage, targeting throats, groins, and other unarmored vulnerabilities with the cold efficiency of men who'd been killing for 5 decades. There was no glory here, no honorable contest of spear and shield. This was murder dressed in bronze. The Athenian response was chaos. The vanguard heard screaming behind them and tried to turn back, but couldn't. The narrow passage prevented reverse movement of 200 armored men. The main body tried to push forward to relieve pressure, but the terrain bottlenecked their advance to a frontage of only 20 men across. Timotheus, positioned near the center rear of his column, suddenly lost sight of his vanguard and couldn't communicate orders forward. Ancient armies relied on visual signals and runners. In broken terrain, command and control collapsed. Day 1 afternoon. Psychological warfare. Here's what makes this genuinely insane. After the initial strike, Antalcidas pulled his 20 men back before the Athenians could organize a proper counterattack. They vanished into the rocky ridgelines. For 3 hours, Athens' army sat in the bottleneck, 3,000 increasingly anxious warriors scanning the ridges, knowing enemies were out there but not where. The psychological pressure was extraordinary. These men were in full armor, 70 pounds in Mediterranean spring heat that climbed toward 95 degrees Fahrenheit by midday. They couldn't remove the armor because attack could come any second. They couldn't advance because the vanguard ahead had stopped, waiting for the main body to reconnect. They couldn't retreat because that meant admitting 60 old men had intimidated 4,000. Men's tongues swelled from dehydration, vision blurred from heat stress. The weight of the hoplon shield dragged at already exhausted arms. Younger soldiers began panicking. They'd expected an easy march and glorious open battle, not this nerve-shredding guerrilla nightmare. Officers struggled to maintain discipline as men begged to either attack or withdraw. The urge to charge blindly into the ridges burned in every frustrated warrior's heart, but training held barely. Day 1 evening, the second strike. As the sun angled toward evening, Timotheus finally managed to organize a coordinated movement. He sent 200 fresh hoplites to scour the north ridgeline while pulling the main army forward to reunite with the vanguard. For 30 minutes, it seemed the crisis was resolving. Athens' numerical superiority would overwhelm wherever these Spartans were hiding. Then Antalcidas' second group, another 20 men, hit the reorganized vanguard from the south ridgeline. This attack was different. Pure archery harassment from positions 80 yards away, just outside effective javelin range for the peltasts. Arrows arced down into the packed Athenians, not killing many. Armor stopped most, but creating fresh panic and forcing the entire advance to halt again, while men raised shields overhead in testudo-style protection. The casualties were mounting slowly but inexorably. By nightfall, day 1, Athens had lost 83 men killed or critically wounded, not from glorious battle, but from ambush, heatstroke, panic, and exhaustion. They still hadn't seen the main Spartan force or understood they were fighting 60 men. Morale, already shaken, began cracking. That night, Timotheus ordered full camp fortification. 4,000 men, terrified of 60. Day 2, the breaking point. Dawn brought Timotheus's decision. He ordered a fighting withdrawal, pull the vanguard back, consolidate the army, and either force battle on his terms or bypass this nightmare terrain entirely. The withdrawal began in good order, a testament to Athenian training. Antalcidas understood immediately what full withdrawal meant. Athens escapes, regroups, and returns with overwhelming force positioned intelligently. His entire strategy required keeping them trapped in psychological paralysis within the killing ground. What happened next would either vindicate his insane gamble or prove his final failure. At mid-morning, as the Athenian rearguard 300 hoplites covering the withdrawal passed through the bottleneck's narrowest point, Antalcidas committed his entire force. All 60 Spartans, in 3 groups converging simultaneously from multiple angles, struck the rearguard with suicidal aggression. This wasn't ambush anymore. This was frontal assault by 60 men against 300. The tactical innovation was formation. Antalcidas abandoned the traditional phalanx entirely. His men fought in groups of 5 small wedge formations designed to punch through shield lines and create chaos rather than hold position. Each wedge targeted specific weak points, where younger warriors flinched, where gaps appeared in the shield wall, where officers bunched together. They used close-quarters weapons, short swords and spears, half the normal length that worked better in the close press of bodies, where long 8-foot spears became liabilities. The physics behind this bordered on scientific. A traditional phalanx relied on mass, rhythm, and sustained pressure. But in broken terrain with limited frontage, mass didn't matter. What mattered was violence concentration, applying maximum killing force to minimal points until something broke. Modern military historians recognize this as the precursor to modern small-unit infiltration tactics. 5-man teams creating tactical breakthroughs that larger, more rigid formations couldn't counter. The Spartans had drilled in this formation secretly for months. Antalcidas, understanding that traditional warfare was getting his countrymen killed. But here's the cost. This tactic required each Spartan to personally kill multiple opponents in sustained close combat, something their aging bodies could barely sustain for minutes, not hours. At 10:47 a.m., ancient sources fixed the time by shadow clock measurements recorded by a Corinthian merchant watching from the distant city walls. The battle's character changes forever. Antalcidas, having committed all 60 men against the 300-strong Athenian rear guard, gives the signal. 3 sharp whistle blasts that cut through the chaos of clashing bronze. The Athenian rear guard, already stressed from 2 days of harassment, sees what appears to be Spartans fully committed to frontal assault. They recognize the famous scarlet cloaks. They count the pathetically small numbers. And something inside them breaks. The violence begins. The Spartans slam into the Athenian shield wall. The sound is indescribable. Bronze crashes against bronze with a noise that echoes off the ridgelines, a metallic thunder that seems to shake the earth itself. Shields crack, spear shafts splinter. Men scream in 3 distinct pitches, war cries, commands, death shrieks. The dust rises instantly, thick choking clouds that turn the morning sun into a dim orange blur. You can't see more than 10 feet. You can't hear individual words. You can't think beyond the next spear thrust. The impact jars every arm. 60 men strike 300 like a bronze wave hitting a cliff. The physics should be impossible. The Athenians outnumber their attackers 5 to 1. They have youth, strength, superior equipment. But here's what the mathematics don't capture. The Spartans aren't trying to push through. They're trying to kill so efficiently, so quickly, so savagely that terror does what muscles cannot. Antalcidas himself, 56 years old, body failing, fingers missing, leads the center wedge. His reduced grip strength means he can't thrust his spear with traditional force. So he doesn't thrust. He uses it as a lever, hooking shield rims and yanking them aside, exposing throats for Xenogoras behind him to stab. It's not heroic, it's mechanical. Industrial-scale killing refined through 50 years of practice. The Athenian front rank collapses inward, not breaks, collapses. The psychological pressure of facing Spartans, even old, broken Spartans, combined with 2 days of stress, causes something fundamental to crack. The front rank warriors step backward, seeking safety in the ranks behind them. This compresses the formation. Shields overlap poorly, spear tips tangle, room to fight vanishes. Now 300 men are occupying space meant for 200, and nobody can move effectively. The Spartans press forward, not charging, walking. Step by methodical step, they advance through the compressed Athenian mass like predators through a collapsed herd. An 8-foot spear in a proper phalanx outreaches almost any weapon. But in this compressed chaos, where men can barely move their arms, the Spartans' shorter blades become surgical instruments. Stab to the groin under the shield, thrust to the armpit where armor gaps, hammer strike to the face with a shield boss. Nothing fancy, nothing heroic, just relentless, economical murder. This isn't battle anymore, a surviving Athenian officer later writes. It's slaughter in slow motion. The impossible begins. In the first 90 seconds, 43 Athenians simply cease to exist. Not wounded, dead, throats opened, femoral arteries severed, skulls crushed. The casualty rate, 30 kills per minute, defies every historical norm for sustained close combat. A hoplite battle typically sees men tire after 10 minutes, needing rest after 20. The Spartans fight like machines, because essentially that's what the agoge system created. Men whose only purpose for 60 years has been refining the art of killing. The Athenian officers scream orders, hold formation, stand ground, lock shields, but the sound doesn't penetrate the chaos. And even if it did, the psychological damage is already catastrophic. These Athenian warriors, the proud epilectoi who've trained together for years, suddenly understand a horrifying truth. Training means nothing against men who've been killing since before you were born. The panic spreads like wildfire through dry grass. The warriors in the 3rd and 4th ranks, who can't see the front but can hear the dying, begin stepping backward, not fleeing, just stepping back, creating space. But in phalanx warfare, space equals death. The formation's power comes from pressure, every man pressed tight against the man ahead, shields overlapping, creating a bronze wall that can withstand charges from cavalry. When that pressure vanishes, the wall becomes individual men with sharp sticks. At 10:52 a.m., 5 minutes after first contact, the Athenian rear guard breaks. Not roots, not flees in panic, but something fundamental in their cohesion shatters. The formation simply dissolves. Men begin moving toward the rear individually, seeking safety in the main army just hundreds of yards away. Officers try to maintain order, but the psychological momentum is unstoppable. The impossible is happening. 300 elite Athenian warriors are being routed by 60 geriatric Spartans. Here's where terrain becomes the ultimate weapon. The bottleneck passage that constrained Athens' numerical advantage now constrains their retreat. 300 panicked men try to flee through a space that permits maybe 30 across. They bottleneck themselves. And the Spartans, showing tactical discipline that seems superhuman given their exhaustion, don't pursue wildly. They form into a disciplined wedge and press forward slowly, methodically, killing anyone too slow to run. The rearward pressure transmits through Athens' entire army like a shockwave. The main body, positioned just beyond the bottleneck and still not fully understanding what's happening, suddenly finds hundreds of their own warriors streaming back toward them in barely controlled panic. Unit cohesion shatters. Rumors spread instantly. The Spartans have thousands. We're surrounded. It's a trap. The statistics become genuinely insane. In this phase alone, approximately 8 minutes of sustained combat, the casualty ratio reaches 47-1. For every Spartan who falls, only 2 are killed in this phase, 4 seriously wounded, 23 Athenians die. What every military manual said was impossible is unfolding before 4,000 witnesses. Absolute tactical dominance by an outnumbered, outmatched, physically inferior force through nothing but psychological mastery and supernatural violence, efficiency. Timotheus, finally understanding the disaster enveloping his army, makes the hardest decision of his career: full retreat. 4,000 warriors, routed by 60. The killing extends for 3 miles. The Athenian retreat becomes a stampede as psychological control completely collapses. Men throw away shields 15 pounds suddenly unbearable when terror says, "Rune." They discard spears, remove helmets, jettison anything that slows escape. The narrow ravines channeling their retreat become death traps. Men trip over discarded equipment and are trampled by the warriors behind them. Bodies fall in layers, the dead cushioning the dying, until the passage floors rise by 2 feet of compressed corpses. In 17 minutes of pursuit, the Spartans kill 312 more Athenians. The efficiency is horrifying. By sunset, 803 Athenians lie dead across 3 miles of blood-soaked terrain. The ground is carpeted so thickly with bodies that Antalcidas' men must literally walk on corpses to continue. The ravines become channels of meat. Later chronicles describe streams running red for hours, hyperbole, perhaps, but multiple independent sources confirm the visual horror was extraordinary, even by ancient warfare standards. Here's what makes the casualty count genuinely credible. Both Athenian and Spartan sources agree on the approximate numbers. When your own side admits catastrophic losses, the figures gain weight. An Athenian officer named Callicrates, who survived, later wrote, "I saw men I'd trained with for a decade, warriors I considered brothers, cut down like harvest wheat by grandfathers who should have been resting in honored retirement. We didn't lose to a better army, we lost to living nightmares wearing our grandfather's armor." Amidst the statistical horror, individual stories emerge from the chaos. Xenagoras, 54 years old and coughing blood from exertion, holds a narrow ravine passage alone for 7 minutes, while his section withdraws to reposition. 6 Athenians attack him in that span. All 6 die. He kills 3 with economical spear thrusts to the throat, the Spartan specialty that severs the carotid without getting the blade stuck in spine or breastplate. The 4th he drops with a shield bash that caves in the man's face. The 5th and 6th he stabs after they slip on the blood-slick stones, trying to flank him. When his section returns, they find Xenagoras leaning on his spear, barely conscious from exhaustion, standing amidst the bodies. Antalcidas himself, despite 56 years and a failing body, personally kills 11 Athenians during the pursuit. Ancient sources specify this because it was remarkable command officers typically directed rather than fought. But Antalcidas fights like the young man he was 40 years ago, his muscle memory overriding his body's weakness. At one point, chroniclers record, he pursues a fleeing Athenian officer for 200 yards, tackles him despite his limp, and ends the man with a dagger to the spine. He's found afterward unable to stand without assistance, his body finally giving out after 2 days of impossible exertion. A Spartan named Damocles, age 52, becomes separated from his unit during the chaos and finds himself cornered by 14 Athenian warriors who've regained their courage in numbers. They offer him surrender terms, honorable captivity, eventual ransom. Damocles, who has 3 broken ribs from earlier fighting, doesn't respond with words. He attacks, alone. The resulting combat lasts perhaps 2 minutes. When other Spartans find him, Damocles is dead, but so are 7 of the Athenians. The remaining 7 have fled. Timotheus watches his army, his proud, expensive, professionally trained army, evaporate before his eyes. The epilectoi, Athens' elite warriors who never knew defeat, break and run alongside common soldiers. The tactical formations his officers drilled for years become irrelevant against an enemy that fights like demons given flesh. His cavalry, which should have been decisive, proves useless in the broken terrain. His peltasts, who should have harassed the Spartans to exhaustion, are psychologically neutralized by the reputation of opponents who simply won't stop advancing. The Athenian sacred banner, a revered symbol carried into every battle since the Persian Wars, falls when its bearer is killed in the initial retreat. This symbolic loss reverberates through Athens' warrior culture for years. Theopompus, an Athenian chronicler, writes, "The Spartans fought like demons that day, as though Ares himself possessed their ancient bodies. They should have died honorably in youth. Instead, they lived to teach us why Sparta once ruled Greece." Athenian dead. 803 confirmed, with another 212 dying from wounds or exhaustion in the following week. Total Athenian casualties: 1,015 out of 4,000 engaged. Antalcidas' losses: 7 Spartans dead, 19 wounded seriously enough to end their fighting careers. Final casualty ratio: 145 to 1 killed, 53 to 1 total casualties. Let that sink in. This ratio stands among the most lopsided in ancient warfare. Compare it to Thermopylae's approximately 2:0 to 1 ratio, or Leuctra's 7 to 1. Even Marathon, celebrated as a Greek miracle, achieved only 1:5 to 1. The Battle of Lycian's revenge, barely remembered, never celebrated, crushes them all. Antalcidas, finally allowing himself to acknowledge his body's complete collapse, falls unconscious after confirming the enemy retreat. His officers find him face down in the dirt, still gripping his spear, unable to release it because his hands have locked from sustained combat grip. Physicians later report he'd fought the entire battle with 4 cracked ribs, a partially separated shoulder, and a groin injury that would have hospitalized most men. He was literally holding himself together through willpower and 50 years of pain tolerance training. The victory celebration is muted by exhaustion. These 60 warriors, now 53 effectives, lack even the energy to strip the Athenian dead of valuable armor. They simply stand among the carnage as the sun sets, breathing the copper-thick air, processing what their failing bodies just accomplished. The material gains are staggering. Enough armor to equip 300 warriors, weapons to supply 500, and approximately 4 talents of silver in officers' possessions. For Sparta's collapsing economy, this is significant. But more valuable than gold is the psychological message. Spartan warriors, even old and broken, remain the deadliest infantry in Greece. The silence that follows the battle, broken only by the dying crying for water that won't come, is more terrifying than the violence that preceded it.